Blog Talk Radio.
Radio brings you The Haunted Sea with host Scott Mardis.
Hello, this is Scott Mardis. Welcome to part 3 of our discussion about the ZUIYO MARU carcass with my guests, Carrick St. Laurent and Andy McGrath. Hello, guys.
Hey, how you doing?
So, when we left off last time, we were talking about the presence of collagen fibers in the flippers of marine reptiles. And they have discovered collagen fibers in an exceptionally well-preserved plesiosaur flipper from Germany. And additionally on top of that, there is the possibility of elastoidin in lizard claw, which is obviously a reptile. Only found one study that mentions it, no follow-ups, and this is from 1982. So it's a, you know, it's a straw to grasp at, but we've got no more modern information, so it's a possibility. But this is all very interesting when you look at it in the context of elastoidin is only supposed to occur in fishes. And we also went over the genetic arguments, or the evolutionary arguments about why they believe that the genetic machinery that created elastoidin was lost in the transition from fish to tetrapods. Now, relative to that, I found an interesting paper that I'm not going to go into too deep, because if we go into this too deep, we'll go down the rabbit hole. And I'm trying to avoid that, but I'm going to try to summarize this real quickly.
All right.
Okay.
All right.
Can I just say curiouser and curiouser, because you said down the rabbit hole?
Yeah. Well, we can't go too far down the, if we go too far down this rabbit hole, we'll be talking about this one thing for 2 hours. So I'm just going to kind of skim over it here.
Cool.
All right.
I just got to enlarge the text here so I can see it. Hang on. My computer is really pokey, so
I'm in the same place.
Yeah. All right. This is a paper from a journal called Frontiers in Cell and Developmental Biology. From, let's see. Hang on. July of 2018. A paper called Problems in Fish to Tetrapod Transition, Genetic Expeditions into Old Specimens. And basically what it says at one point in this paper is that there seems to be evidence that the elastoidin in paired fins has a different origin than the elastoidin in, say, a dorsal fin or a caudal fin of a fish. So in other words, they're saying that there may be different origins for the elastoidin in paired appendages or paired fins in fish than there is from the elastoid in dorsal fins and caudal fins. And there's a lot of questions they ask in this paper, which are too deep for us to go into here, that may question all this stuff about, well, you know, tetrapods form their limbs one way and fish fins are formed another way.
Mm.
So there are questions.
Mm.
Coming back to the plesiosaur flipper, there's an interesting thing in there. I was wondering why they had not done any microscopic examination of it or any trying to retrieve any biochemical information from it. And I've got an answer.
All right.
This is from the same paper that describes the collagen fibers from the plesiosaur flipper, which is called New Insights on the Systematic Paleoecology and Paleobiology of a Plesiosaurian with Soft Tissue Preservation from the Toarcian of Holzmaden, Germany from 2017. And here's what it says. It says, because the occurrence of potential soft tissue is exceptional in plesiosaurians, it was decided to avoid destructive analysis that may have helped to establish their chemical or ultrastructural composition. Nevertheless, there is striking resemblance between the dark and buff-colored materials surrounding the neck, tail, and hind limb of SMNS 51945 and the soft tissues documented in several ichthyosaur and cephalopod specimens from the same strata, as well as Centimurian, Colovian, Oxfordian ichthyosaurs from the UK, and Cretaceous fish from Brazil. In all these fossils, the buff-colored material was interpreted as phosphatized muscle tissue. In the Holzmaden ichthyosaur specimen SMNS 10013, this buff-colored material was identified as mainly composed of calcium phosphate using energy dispersive X-ray spectroscopy, and also interpreted as phosphatized muscle tissues. So, it's collagen fibers. They suspect it may be muscle fibers, but they're not sure. So, anyway.
Well, that's interesting because that might tie a bit into not just the physical descriptions that may or may not be accurate from the fishermen who saw this particular carcass, but the fact that they were unwilling to do this biochemical analysis on this particular specimen might kind of be the same sort of deal that we had with the flaws that might be present in the biochemical analysis of the actual ZUIYO MARU carcass as well. Maybe.
Well, what they were basically saying is that there's a lot more of this fibrous material preserved in ichthyosaurs than there is in plesiosaurs.
Yes, right.
Which is true. And they're saying they didn't want to destroy the integrity of the fossil since the preservation is so rare, but they did compare it to studies that have been done on ichthyosaur fibers from ichthyosaur paddles. So now is probably the time to go into that evidence, and it's very the information about the ichthyosaur fibers are very contradictory, as you'll see. And then there's modern evidence of fibers in the flippers of sea turtles, particularly leatherback turtles.
Right, right.
So let me go over that. Let me see here. I'll try to send you the picture here. Hang on. Let's see. Let's see here. Bear with me here.
No problem.
Let's see. All right, you guys got that picture?
Yes, indeed.
All right.
Got it.
This is the first evidence that came to light of elastoidin-like fibers in the fin of an ichthyosaur.
Yeah, right along the edge there. Wow.
Yes. Most of the time, when they have skin impressions of the outlines of ichthyosaur flippers, there's no fibers. They're very rarely preserved. But in this case, it was very good preserved. So, in other words, these fibers set on top of the flipper bones, as you can see in the picture. Now I'm going to read some of the text here.
Right.
This is from by Richard Owen, a description of some of the soft parts of the integument of the hind fin of the Ichthyosaurus, indicating the shape of the fin when recent. Transactions of the Geological Society of London, Series 2, Volume 6, Part 1, 1841.
Wow.
All right, so this is from his article. I think you guys know who Richard Owen is, right?
Yes.
The famous anatomist that gave dinosaurs their name, dinosaur.
Yes.
A very famous English zoologist.
Richard who?
Paleontologist. All right, so I'm going to read from the text here. It says, it appears to be the posterior fin of Ichthyosaurus communis. The impressions and fractured portions of the two middle series of phalangeal ossicles, which are the toe bones, are nearly complete, and there are terminal portions of the two outer rows, making 6 digits in all. The impression and a thin layer of the dark, colorized integument of the terminal half of the fin are most distinctly preserved and exposed on the fractured surface of the lias matrix. That's the surrounding matrix of the fossil around the bones, the strata it came out of. The contour of the extremity of the fin is thus clearly defined and is accurately represented in the subjoined figure, plate XX. The anterior margin is formed by a smooth, unbroken, well-defined line and appears to have been merely a duplicature of the integument, which is the skin. But the whole of the posterior margin exhibits the remains and impressions of a series of rays by which the fold of the integument has been supported. Immediately posterior to the digital ossicles, there is a band of carbonaceous matter varying from 2 to 4 lines in breadth and extending in an obtuse pointed form for 1.5 inches beyond the digital ossicles. This I take to be the remains of the dense ligamentous matter which immediately invested the bones of the paddle. Its fiber structure is distinctly displayed. The rays above mentioned are continuing from the posterior edge of this carbonized ligamentous matter in which their bases appear to have been implanted. They extend with a slight curve obliquely downwards to the edge of the integumentary impression. The upper rays are directed more transversely, but they gradually lie more in the direction of the axis of the fin as they approach its termination. The most interesting feature in these rays that they bifurcate as they approach the edge of the fin, the two branches diverging in a very slight degree and thus repeating, as it were, the character of the digits themselves. From the rarity of their preservation and their appearance and coexistence in the present instance with remains of the integument, it is evident that they were not osseous, but probably either cartilaginous or the albuminous horn-like tissue in which the marginal rays consist in the fins of the sharks and other plagiostomous fishes. So right there, he's comparing those fibers in the ichthyosaur fin to elastoidin fibers.
Right, right.
Yeah.
It seems more and more, the more that we examine elastoidin and collagen, the more we find that there's not just so little difference, but it's so common in marine species. It's almost
what's interesting is I've got a montage that I put together that shows the same ichthyosaur fin alongside images of basking shark elastoidin and the elastoidin from a sailfish. So if you'll hang on, I'll send you that. Hang on.
Sure.
That's interesting. It's interesting that with his thoughts on this being present, with this available evidence being present for so long, it's strange that it wasn't referenced in any way when this carcass, the MARU carcass, was first examined, and the elastoidin exclusion, became the primary game changer at that point. It's strange that somebody didn't look back and say, well, actually, look here from history, we actually have a very early example of this.
Well, that paper was around in 1978. He was already 140 years old.
Yes, what I mean. Yeah, exactly.
And if they'd have just dug around and looked a little bit,
they
would have seen this, and this might have been a game changer in 1978.
Yeah.
Especially.
If you look at the image I just sent you, that's the ichthyosaur paddle in the middle. The one on the left is the pectoral fin of a sailfish, which is a bony fish.
Right.
And the yellow image on the right is basking shark elastoid.
Just especially with that basking shark, it's not even just like it looks similar, it's that it looks nearly identical. I mean, it's even along the same anatomical area as the ichthyosaurs.
The thing is, though, there seems to be a lot of debate in the scientific literature about what these ichthyosaur fibers are, which is what I'm about to demonstrate. And I'm also going to show you here, just a second here, and I can send you another image. Hang on.
I've actually got a question about that basking shark image. I'm noticing that the fibers are located kind of near the longest point of the flipper, whereas in the ichthyosaur it runs up the entire side. Does it also run up the entire side in the basking shark?
Well, the difference is that the basking shark and its fin doesn't have any bones like you would see in an ichthyosaur.
Oh, right, okay.
So that makes a difference right there.
Right, and that's why on the sailfish you see it actually go up the entire side because it's bony. Okay, I see.
Yeah. All right, where's the image I'm looking for? Okay, what you're looking at here, there's the ichthyosaur paddle in the middle. The one on the left is the actual flipper of the ZUIYO MARU carcass as it was laying on the deck of the ship. You can see the fibers hanging out of it, right?
Yeah, right.
And the one on the extreme right is the plesiosaur flipper from Germany with the fibers hanging out of it. If you'll look on the right edge,
you can see the impressions right there, yeah.
You can see the fibers hanging out. That's what I'm saying. Do you see it?
Yeah.
There you go. There's direct comparisons.
See, that's intriguing because I guess part of what the question comes down to, at least to some extent, might be, well, on the anatomy of the flipper of the ZUIYO MARU carcass, do we have fibers that ran up the entire side of the flipper, or are they concentrated to that tip? It's kind of hard to tell with the image quality.
Well, from what I see, it seems to be all over. Hang on a second here.
It does. There is some of that yellow substance off to the right of that image, and that's interesting because I guess
I have an isolated image of just the flipper of the ZUIYO MARU. Hang on.
Yeah, that would be pretty atypical of a basking shark, I suppose, then.
Yeah. Hang on a second here.
That's interesting.
Okay, that's just the ZUIYO MARU flipper.
Oh, yeah, look at that. Wow.
So you got
it does
fibers all over it.
It does, and that's not what you're supposed to see with a basking shark.
Well, hang on a second here.
Is
That's
that
kind of
correct?
complicated.
You're not supposed to
Okay.
see what the best can show?
Wait a minute. Okay, here's another image.
Hmm.
And what you're looking at here, on the left is the ZUIYO MARU flipper.
Right.
On the right is the fin or flipper of the Parker's Cove, Nova Scotia monster from 2002.
Mm.
That definitely was a basking shark.
That's interesting.
So you can see some resemblance there too. So
Yeah. Yeah, and it does
the bottom
run
two images are microscopic images of the ZUIYO MARU fibers at different
Oh,
scales.
wow, really?
So, yeah.
That's interesting. Yeah, so I guess the diagram is a bit misleading then. It does look like you can expect to see basking shark, at least their carcasses, have fibers that extend
Well,
further
yeah,
up the sides of their appendages.
that's one thing I've been trying to emphasize here is that the evidence is extremely ambiguous.
Mm. Yeah, yeah. And again, that ties back to the whole thing about fibers and about collagens and about elastoidins, is that they're the more, as time goes on, the more common we find that they actually are in marine species.
Yeah, the only way that we're ever going to be able to resolve this case is with a remaining tissue sample of the ZUIYO MARU carcass itself.
Right.
And a DNA analysis of that is the only way we're ever going to solve this case.
Mm.
So if there's a piece of it out there somewhere, we need to find it.
We talked about that plenty of times. Yeah, that would
Yeah.
definitely be the way forward.
I'm on that mission at the moment. I'm on that mission. I'm trying to get some sort of response from the university.
That'd be wonderful.
Okay, now this that I just sent you was from a paper written in 1924 by a paleontologist named Andrews. Now these are images from a different flipper, but you can see the way the fibers are curling up on the edge like you saw in the one described by Owen, right?
Mm. Yeah, wow.
Now, this is something really confusing about what Andrews says in his paper. Now, let me find that. Bear with me here. Oh, where is it? Hang on a minute.
Take your time.
I'm getting there.
It's a lot to sort through.
I'm telling you, you just don't know. I imagine a lot of people would see this, all this stuff, and just go, I'm not touching this with a 10-foot pole.
Well, I'm sure it's what's happened for the past, what has it been now, 30, 50 years or so?
It's certainly a lot easier to wave your hand and say, oh, it was a rotten shark, than it is to go through all this.
Crazy.
Okay, here we go. Andrews, 1924. Notes on the ichthyosaurian paddle showing traces of soft tissue by C.W. Andrews from March 1924. Let's see. This is from an ichthyosaur found at Barrow-on-Soar, somewhere in England, probably around Lyme Regis, preserved in the Oxford Museum. Let's see, but now Andrews took some issue with Owen's original description. And I just got to find that. The most remarkable structure is that seen on the front border of the fin. Here, running about at right angles to the axis of the fin, there's a series of straight rod-like rays separated by intervals of 2 millimeters. These rods, when not obscured by fragments of the wrinkled skin, are quite definite structures. They sometimes seem to be formed by the fusion of several thinner rods, and although often broken up into short lengths, do not seem to have been definitely segmented. From the proximal border of each rod, a series of fibers, presumably muscular, curved outward and upward to the distal border of the next rod higher up, so that the border of the fin appears to be divided into narrow areas disposed at right angles to the axis of the fin and crossed by curved bundles of fibers, which sometimes appear to bifurcate or split in two. The rods themselves are continued onto the central portion of the paddle, and in a few cases they seem to have extended into the posterior fin. Similar rod-like structures are described and figured by Owen, 1841. He seems to have regarded them as marking the divisions between scales. So far as I'm aware, no instance of such rays has been recorded in other reptilia, and I've not been able to find any comparable structure. Okay, let me see here. Now this is the part that I'm confused about. Now, you see from the figure that it looks exactly like the figure from 1841 by Owen, right?
Right.
Okay, this is how the paper ends. It says, there is no trace of the bifurcating rays of cartilaginous or albuminous horn-like substance described by Owen, although I have been able to see them in his specimen, and his figure seems to be somewhat misleading. I don't know what to make about that. But that's what it says.
He thought of those.
It looks identical to me to the other illustration.
Yeah,
the hair like, and it looks just like the elastoidin fibers and the elastoidin from the sailfish too. So I don't know what to think about that.
That's so strange, because it's not even, the strangest part of it isn't even that it's...
Well, that's what it says.
Yeah.
So make of it what you will, but,
Could the dispute be...
I'm not trying to cover anything up. I'm presenting contradictory evidence here.
But with two well-noted scientists existing around about the same time, could it be that essentially this is a big claim, and therefore it's being disputed? But the dispute doesn't seem to be very clear, other than to say
that's what I'm saying.
What it appears to show is not what it is.
What the hell is he talking about?
Which happens in science
the fibers
all the time.
Look exactly the same to me. I don't understand this.
But that happens in science all the time, especially when something is groundbreaking or perhaps even pushing the paradigm slightly. Is he perhaps saying, yes, it appears to be that way, but it can't be what it is?
Well, I don't know how to interpret it.
That's the weirdest thing, is it doesn't even suggest an alternate explanation. It's like there's no... It's as though he saw this image and just didn't see this fibrous material, which is strange, because obviously it's there. It's in the diagram.
It's like essentially he's saying, look at this, it looks exactly like the thing that Owen described in 1841, but it's not the same stuff, because I said so. I mean, I don't know what,
Yeah, it's a shame there's no explanation for it. Strange.
And it gets even weirder, as I'm about to demonstrate.
Right.
You don't mind if we take a quick break, do you?
No, not at all. I'm going to water myself, actually. So.
All this reading just wears me out.
I can imagine, yeah.
Yeah. All right, we took a short break, and now we're going to pick up where we left off with the ichthyosaurs. Now, you saw how confusing that last paper was. Well, now it gets even weirder. Hang on. Let me see here. I just got to find what I'm looking for here. Hang on. All right. Hang on. Let's see here. Bear with me.
No problem.
Okay. There is a South African molecular paleontologist named Thigardin Wingham Soliar that has done all kinds of studies on ichthyosaur fibers and dinosaur skin fibers, and he's also done work on the collagen fibers inside the fins of sharks. So he's written all kinds of relevant information to the debate we're going over here today. And this is from a paper he wrote in 2003. And he's talking about the fibers described by Owen. This particular paper is called Evolution of Birds, Ichthyosaur Integumental Fibers Conform to Dromaeosaur Protofeathers. So this is touching on the dinosaurs that have been found in China with what are assumed to be hair-like structures that may be protofeathers or possibly skin fibers. There's a debate about it. This is from some German journal called Naturwissenschaften from 2003. And I'm just going to read this paragraph. The dromaeosaur tail is a relatively stiff organ achieved by powerful bands of ligaments that extend along the dorsolateral and ventrolateral surfaces of the tail vertebrae. Enlarged interspinal ligaments also occur on the dorsal vertebrae. Two possible scenarios are envisaged in Sinosauropteryx. Either the bundles of tightly strung ligaments broke contact along the vertebrae during post-mortem decay and came to lie alongside the caudal vertebrae, or the skin possessed masses of strengthening fibers of rays vertically oriented to the long axis of the body. For instance, Richard Owen illustrated an ichthyosaur paddle in which fine rays, reminiscent of those of Sinosauropteryx, bordered the fleshy, non-skeletonized edges of the paddle, presumably for support or stiffening. So he's talking about them being some kind of stiffening rays, which sounds like elastoidin, right?
Mm.
And he's talking about the ones from 1841 that Richard Owen was describing. That first figure you saw. Then, interestingly enough, 11 years after this, I wrote the guy an email to ask him about the fibers. And I'm going to read that one now. Hang on. And I'll send it to you, too. All right, let me find it. This is an email I sent him in 2014. So, this is from June 29th, 2014. Dr. Wingham Soliar, I'm sure you are a busy man and I don't want to take up much of your valuable time. I just have a very straightforward question, if you don't mind answering it. Are the ichthyosaur fin rays, as described by Owen in 1841 and Andrews in 1924, unique structures differing from the ichthyosaur dermal fibers you have described in the past, or just the same thing? Question mark. Your answer would be much appreciated. Thank you, Scott Martis. Then a day later, he sent me an email back. It says, Dear Scott, I remember looking years ago at Owen's figure of the fin rays. If I remember correctly, these were always unidirectional and much thicker. I would imagine these are cartilaginous structures. The dermal fibers, on the other hand, are smaller diameter and critically comprise alternating layers of oppositely oriented cross fibers. This is a classic biomechanical structure found in the skin of especially fast-swimming arteniform swimmers such as the white shark. If you don't have any of my papers on it, let me know. Tuna, dolphins, and ichthyosaurs. I hope this helps. All the best. So there, he's talking about them being made out of cartilage.
Interesting.
And then you look at his later papers, and he's talking about them being muscle fibers. So I don't know what to think. You know?
Yeah, that's interesting.
They look like
mentioned
the
the
last
ichthyosaurs
again,
again, which is
to me,
something.
but he wrote a paper comparing the dermal fibers in the collagen fibers in the fins of sharks to those of ichthyosaurs. Let me see if I can find that figure. Hang on a second here. You see that?
Yes, indeed.
The upper left
Got it.
is the dorsal fin of an ichthyosaur, and the figure on the right is showing how the fibers of the skin of an ichthyosaur look, and then down below that, that bottom figure, those fibers, which I believe are dermal fibers of an ichthyosaur, look a lot like the fibers hanging out of the back of that plesiosaur paddle from Germany.
Yeah.
So,
Sure.
I think I've got one more figure. Hang on. Let me see here. Let me see. Anyway, what you've got here is Owen's ichthyosaur paddle on the left. Then the upper right is the figure from Andrews' paper in 1924. Then the bottom image, if you look at, there's a dark stain on that ichthyosaur skin. You can see hair-like fibers on a dark patch of that skin, and that's from the paper that came out a couple of years ago about the ichthyosaur blubber. So there was some fibers preserved with it too.
Amazing.
So basically, at the end of the day, what you've got is you've got what appear to be elastoid-like fibers in exceptionally well-preserved ichthyosaur paddles that are in the right place and physically resemble elastoid fibers. There's all kinds of debate about what exactly they are, and you see similar fibers in that plesiosaur flipper from Germany. So it is what it is. You take that, you put that together with the evidence of elastoidin or possible elastoidin in lizard claw, and it all becomes very interesting despite the contradictory interpretations that I've just presented.
It's very interesting. And
So
I mean,
the only thing
honestly,
I can add on top of that is modern fibrous evidence from sea turtles, from their flippers, which is interesting too. So I think we should move on to that. Hang on a second. Okay, did you get that image?
Yes, indeed.
All right,
Got it.
hang on a second here. Now I got to find it for me so I can read it. Bear with me. All right. It's from a book from 1997, The Biology of Sea Turtles, edited by Peter L. Lutz and John A. Music. An article in that volume called Sea Turtle Locomotion, Mechanisms, Behavior, and Energetics. And it's by a sea turtle biologist that lives here in Florida named Jeanette Wyneken. And here's what it says. Flippers and the supporting skeleton. Elongate flippers are typical of secondarily aquatic vertebrates that propel themselves with paired appendages, seals, penguins, marine turtles, and plesiosaurs. The modification of the pectoral appendage from a limb with a typical foot as the elongated semi-rigid flipper is perhaps the most striking specialization of sea turtles. The radius and ulnar are functionally fused by thick connective tissue. The digits are elongated and made stiff by layers of fibrous connective tissue overlaid by a scaled skin. All right, let me repeat that. The digits are elongated and made stiff by layers of fibrous connective tissue overlaid by a scaled skin.
Mm-hmm.
So over their digits in their flipper, they have a layer of fibrous connective tissue.
Right, right.
Which is basically what we've been talking about for the ichthyosaurs and plesiosaurs.
Yeah, right. The kind of collagen-like fiber. That's an interesting point about sea turtles, especially because the cool thing about sea turtles is the varieties that I suppose you could say are anatomically similar to what we see in the ZUIYO MARU carcass, things like leatherbacks. They actually display more biodiversity in the kinds of collagen that help make them up than other types of sea turtles. So if you were to, I guess, consider the idea of a turtle for the ZUIYO MARU case, the fact that it would, if it was a turtle, which is a big if, but if it was, it would have to be something seemingly that is soft shell or leatherback. That's actually exactly the kind that you would expect could be mistaken for a shark in a chemical analysis, because there's just so much diversity that it's so similar in some cases.
Well, there's a lot of anatomical features of the ZUIYO MARU carcass, and also that you see in mutilated basking sharks that is very turtle-ish.
Yeah, it's one of those things that just points out yet again, and perhaps this more starkly than some other points, because these are extant species that we're talking about now. And of course, most likely the prehistoric turtles had this too, especially things like Archelon.
Absolutely.
You know, they're collagen makeups.
Archelon is distantly related to the leatherbacks.
Yes, right. They were essentially just very large, anatomically somewhat different leatherback turtles. So,
very similar.
That's the interesting thing about the whole turtle thing. Of course, that doesn't say that ZUIYO MARU was a turtle, but it's one of those examples where it's like saying that it has to be a shark based on collagen fibers or elastoidins is at this point, kind of atrocious because it seems like everything in the ocean has these things, and it's
Yeah, well, there's more evidence that these fibers in living sea turtles are collagenous. About
all right.
10%. So, if you look at that image that I just sent, there's a picture that actually shows the layers of the leatherback turtle flipper, and you can actually see there's a white layer up there at the top. That is the fibers. It says, next to that photograph, it says ventral view of the left front flipper that is partially skinned to show the flexible connective tissue enveloping the triceps muscle complex, the thick and stiffened leading edge of the muscles of the palmar surfaces of the flipper, and the extensive muscles retained in the palmar carpus. This is from a book called The Leatherback Turtle Biology and Conservation, edited by James R. Spatilla and Pilar Santidrian Tamillo, published in 2015. And here's what it says about the leatherback. It says, the metacarpals articulate with the distal carpals and with the phalange by synovial joints that are encased in thick fibrous connective tissue. Although it is not part of the skeleton, a thick layer of fibrous connective tissue stiffens and stabilizes the entire leading edge of the flipper blade in adults and juveniles.
Wow.
Now, I've got an additional quote that indicates that these fibers are collagen fibers. I just got to get that one up. Hang on. Let's see. Now, the book I just quoted the first time, The Biology of Sea Turtles, there's actually 3 volumes to that. And I believe this is from volume 3. Let's see. Yep. The Biology of Sea Turtles, volume 3, published in 2013. This is another article by Jeanette Wyneken called The Skeleton and In Vivo View of Structure. And here's what it says. The forearm bones, radius and ulna, are short in sea turtles and in adults become functionally fused along their shafts by fibrous connective tissue. Similarly, a network of collagen-rich ligaments tightly attaches the wrist elements to one another. So, given the fact that all this fossil evidence from plesiosaurs and ichthyosaurs are phosphatized collagen fibers, and here you have really good evidence of fibrous collagen fibers in the flippers of sea turtles. I mean, you know, looks to me like we have abundant evidence of collagen fibrous support in the flippers of marine reptiles, both living and fossil. Yeah, so.
That's very interesting.
What kind of collagen fibers they are, if they're specialized like elastoidin, is an open question. However, you take this evidence and put it together with the evidence of an elastoidin-like collagen or possibly elastoidin itself in the claws of lizards, it opens up a whole lot of interesting questions relative to the point that, well, the elastoidin fibers proved that the ZUIYO MARU carcass was a shark. Obviously.
Right.
How anybody could walk away and just ignore all this and say it was a shark is just mind-boggling to me. Is this not scientific evidence?
Yeah, it's just so weird that it's so I guess overlooked is the right word. I wonder why.
I don't know why. Well, let me get more feedback from you guys about all this. What do you think?
I guess it's one of those things that just is so it's like the only real conclusion that you can come to, the more and more information you find, is that this was a botched examination, even if it's probably correct just based on the anatomical look of the carcass. Because obviously we've discussed briefly that there's these collagen fibers and specific types of them that are adapted in the same ways, present in a lot of different species. But not only that, that they look similar. They look identical. They're found in the same areas of the body.
Yes.
I think that the point about not necessarily just the chemical composition, because that's pretty easy to say was a process that wasn't carried through properly. Just even the consideration of what it means for this carcass to have these fibers, the conclusion shark, at least in that respect, was completely jumped to. Again, even if it's correct, it might be correct by mistake. I think it isn't necessarily bad to say that, because that's kind of what it seems like is happening here. The more we find out about animals, the more we find out that if we were to just try and ID this thing off of its fibers, it could have been almost anything in the ocean.
Well, the thing is, if these collagen fibers, we already know that shark elastoidin is made out of collagen primarily. If these marine reptile flipper collagen fibers are high in tyrosine amino acid, they might be virtually indistinguishable from a shark elastoidin if they're biochemically very similar.
Yeah, right. And
then on top of that, you add the sodium hypochlorite bleach treatment.
Right.
On top of that, so who knows? There's enough of a question there that you can at least go back and look at it a second time.
Yeah, it makes me wonder too, the information we're seeing about the functioning properties of some of these fibers. I'm looking at the Biology of Sea Turtles Volume 3 paragraph, where it says, similarly, a network of collagen-rich ligaments tightly attaches the wrist elements to one another. It reminds me a lot of the analysis that was, or one of the two analyses on the, I think it was the ichthyosaur flipper that said, well, we're not sure if this necessarily means that this was something that had these fibers at the edge, or if part of what we're seeing in these fossils is that these are ligaments that were like fibers that connected pieces of the body together like scales.
Yeah, well, it's, the thing is, when we get into talking about all this stuff, we're talking about a lot of areas that there's still a lot of questions about, which is what makes it so difficult. We're touching on areas that haven't been completely investigated yet. Like, what is the complete biochemical information that we can get from these fossilized plesiosaur and ichthyosaur fibers? And as far as I know, these collagen fibers in sea turtle flippers have not been analyzed biochemically.
Right.
Or microscopically. So, what do we know about them? Not much.
Yeah, exactly. There seems to be a lot of...
if there was a lot of literature out there about them, I would have been able to find it. And you see the small pickings I was able to get out of those sea turtle books. That's it.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like it's a subject that's been extensively written upon, which is kind of one of the reasons that we have talks like this, because, again, the talk's purpose isn't necessarily to posit plesiosaur or basking shark or turtle or whatever. It's to say, hey, I don't think we're giving this enough attention because we don't understand much about this, and we still don't. And maybe if we decided to review this kind of case more, we would have a bigger knowledge base, and we wouldn't have to be coming across these cases where we're like, oh, well, what does it mean for this thing to have fibers? Maybe if we studied it more extensively because of these cases, we'd be having less of these cases.
Yeah, it's going back to the shark arguments, looking at the anatomical features of the ZUIYO MARU carcass, there is nothing about the carcass that was particularly diagnostic toward it being a plesiosaur. I mean, sure, it had a body, a large central body with 4 flippers and a long neck and a turtle-like head, which reminds people of a plesiosaur.
Right.
But if you look at the anatomical features that the paleontologists used to define what a plesiosaur is, it really had none of those, which is interesting. I mean, you can take the ZUIYO MARU carcass anatomical features, they're very ambiguous, and you can build some kind of unknown reptile that has pieces of a plesiosaur and pieces of a sea turtle and pieces of a mosasaur, and you can build a hypothetical marine reptile out of it because the features are so ambiguous. But if you look at all the features combined, put together, and compare them with the known cases of mutilated basking sharks, it's a better fit.
Yeah, which is, I think, why I still definitely lean towards basking shark, but really that isn't necessarily the point. The point is that even if this conclusion about basking shark is correct, which it probably is, it really dodged the bullet on being wrong, because this was a very poorly examined case. This was not thoroughly examined at all. There's plenty of things that were assumed.
Even if it did turn out to be a basking shark, this is a very worthwhile intellectual enterprise to ask the relevant questions that, what if it hadn't been? You know, what are the steps you could take to find out what it was? Yeah,
and those steps will be important, not only as steps to figure out what this is, but steps to remember going forward for the scientific endeavor that we have in zoology, to not have another ZUIYO MARU incident, to be able to find something that's ambiguous like this, and instead of being able to sit there and be like, well, we don't know much about this and this, so we'll do the closest thing to a good test that we can do, to instead say, oh, well, we've figured out what happened with what went wrong and what went right with ZUIYO MARU. Now we can study this and know within half a year exactly what this is. No questions asked.
Well, you know, the thing is, now, 40 years after the fact, you have remarkable genetic techniques and scientific technology that was not available 40 years ago.
Yes, right.
Unfortunately, that genetic technology can't be applied to blurry photographs. The only way it can be applied to the ZUIYO MARU case is to go find a surviving fiber from the ZUIYO MARU carcass and test that with this new technology.
Right.
That might have the final answer. And if we can never do that, it's always going to be a what if, you know?
Right, exactly.
Because even the people that argue that it's a shark, you know, can't completely rule out the possibility of it being an unknown shark. And they can't really completely rule out the possibility of it being a reptile, based on just the fiber evidence.
Right, and that's the issue at the essence of all this, is that in a scientific endeavor, your goal is to be accurate to reality by the end. And the fact that we have a very loose grip on what the reality of this could have been, because we have so much under-examined data, is a failure on the part of the scientists to examine.
It's like the Patterson film. Unless we have some kind of breakthrough of some kind, of a dramatic sort of nature, it's always going to be one of those what ifs. You know, you've got to always have somebody out there that thinks it's a guy in a suit, and that will never be convinced by arguments based on just the film.
Right, and I was going to say it's even more ambiguous in that sense than the ZUIYO MARU carcass, because at least we got examples that were at one point studied and measured, even if badly, for ZUIYO MARU. There was no such measurements for Patterson-Gimlin film. You know, we have tracks.
I'm not trying to jump on the Patterson-Gimlin film.
No,
I
just to kind of expand the comparison there.
But I'm just pointing out the obvious problems. You know, there's always going to be somebody out there that's going to think it's a guy in a suit. And, you know, unless there's some kind of big breakthrough, you're never going to convince those people that it's not a guy in the sea.
Right.
So, it's
I think
it is what it is.
I still think, Scott, with this case, and Carrick, I still think with this case, there's so much that we gloss over. I think the evidence that you've come up with, especially with the elastoidin possibly being present in reptiles, is definitely worth investigating. But also, it takes us back to that first sketch by Yano. It takes us back to the other biologists who asserted that this was some sort of unknown animal as far as they knew. And we have to gloss over all of those qualifications and all of those reputations and professional people putting themselves in a very risky position to claim that this was an unknown or an unusual animal, similar to a plesiosaur, not just a basking shark, which again I find really hard to believe that they never drew up from the sea. They never trawled up a rotting basking shark before. It seems almost impossible those fishermen didn't have that experience or knowledge.
If you think about Obata and Imazumi and the other guy, Shikama.
Yeah.
Think about, they were brave enough to come forward and say, we think this could have been a reptile.
Yeah.
And they didn't even know about all the stuff we're discussing here.
Okay.
If they'd have known about all this stuff, they would have probably been even more positive.
Mm-hmm.
And the ship's biologist, he's not a lightweight. He's a biologist on a fishing vessel, a Japanese fishing
they interviewed
vessel.
him 30 years later, and he still said it would.
Yeah,
he didn't think it was a shark.
Exactly.
Nobody,
other
than him, examined that carcass any better
I think
than what he did.
The problem is with this is if they had trawled up some unknown species of shark, and that's what they were claiming, there would be a lot more credibility, a lot more investigation there, a lot less discrediting of these.
We can't rule out that possibility either.
Possibility, but there'd be a lot less discrediting of these notable academics and professionals who discovered this carcass. But because of the nature of what it could be, we have to sort of do everything we can, I suppose, to not believe them. I know that's in our interest to do that, and to find issues with their testimony, find issues with their examination. But still, all these years later, as you said, I think they're all dead now, aren't they?
Well, you know the story of what happened to Dennis Tucker?
No.
He claimed to have seen the Loch Ness Monster and was fired from the British Museum.
Oh, that guy. Yeah.
So that put the fear of God into a lot of these guys, I think.
Well, I think there was an issue back then that if you even went up to Loch Ness, that you lost your job. That was the unofficial line, allegedly.
Well, I think it's very interesting that up until that happened, Maurice Burton was very pro plesiosaur Loch Ness Monster. And then around the same time that Dennis Tucker got fired, he completely flipped and went skeptic. Okay. There must be a connection.
Look, if your job depends upon it sometimes, it's...
Well, I think he was worried about his reputation. He saw what happened to Dennis Tucker, and he thought, well, I better lay off on this or I'm going to be ruined.
And don't the three of us know, really, that investigating cryptids is not really something that gives you a great reputation?
That's true. Mean,
it's not something that sort of says, oh, great, fantastic. Whenever I tell people I like to investigate Bigfoot and things like that, they kind of look at me like, I'm a bit special, got a bit of a side hobby, a bit of a simpleton. Wow. And that's just how people feel about it, because it's outside of the remit of normal life. And it's like saying I'm a ghost investigator or I'm looking for aliens to the common man.
There were people that were ridiculed during their day and eventually proven to be right, like Alfred Wegener with his continental drift theory. Continental plates was laughed at for a long time, and now it's accepted theory. So, it's possible to be ridiculed and be right.
I think it's happened. So I mean,
I don't know.
creatures that were that we just accept as a part of the natural fauna of this world now are were once the stuff of myth and legend, and they had crazy reputations
were
and their
extinct
descriptions.
for 70 million years until 1938.
Exactly.
Never
Or
know.
even gorillas or okapi or the Komodo dragon, whatever you want to say, that in the last 100 or so years, these things have been discovered, and yet they were ethno-known animals. They were stuff of myth and legend.
Well, the Comoro Islanders knew about the coelacanth before the scientists did. They even had a common name for it. They called it the Gombessa.
Of course. Can you imagine trying to describe an okapi to somebody who'd never seen one and say, well, it's kind of like a giraffe that's shaped like a horse with two horns in its head, and
it looks like
a zebra.
It looks like a donkey with stripes on its ass.
Yeah, it looks like a midget giraffe.
Yeah,
had sex with a donkey, and a zebra got involved. I mean, it's just it's a crazy.
They're weird animals.
If you had to describe that to somebody you'd never seen it, and they'd never seen it, what would you come up with? How could you be believed?
Yeah. Good
and
point.
anyway, I go off point, completely off point. But the reputations of these people keeps coming back to me. I think this line of investigation you've gone into proves at least that this type of fiber could be present in reptiles and prehistoric reptiles, and so that's that's a great line of investigation. But also, let's look at the case itself. These were not lightweights. These were professional people who stake their reputation on a very big claim in a very conservative society.
Yep. Well, you guys want to wrap it up for today, and let's come back the next time?
Sure.
All right. We'll pick it up when we get it rescheduled then.
Sounds
Fantastic.
good.
Fantastic. Give me a day or two.
Okay, so we're back. Before we completely leave the discussion about the fibers, one last thing I'd like to throw in is I was able to find images of fossilized elastoidin fibers. And I put together a montage to show what they look like compared to the ichthyosaur fibers and the plesiosaur fibers. So let me send that to you guys. Hang on a second here. Bear with me.
No problem.
All right. Let me see. Okay. So you had any additional thoughts since our last conversation?
Not that many. I think that we've at least I've said all that I wanted to say on the fiber issue, and I think that seeing these diagrams will be a really good way to kind of end that off.
Well, we will eventually be coming back to it when we talk about the new molecular biology methods they have of identifying these carcasses.
Right.
That sounds very interesting.
But what I want to concentrate for the most part on this section now is looking at the anatomical features of the carcass that people pointed to say it was a shark. So let me get this fossilized elastoidin image up here. All right. Let me see here. Okay. The two images across the top are fossilized elastoidin from a Devonian-era shark. The image on the left is the actual photograph of the fossil. The image on the upper right is the drawing interpretation of that same image. And below, as you can see on the left, is the plesiosaur fiber flipper. In the middle is Owen's ichthyosaur flipper. And on the bottom right is the ZUIYO MARU flipper.
Wow. That
So
does
you can
look...
see the similarities there. Even
Yeah.
the way it curls up on the ends and splits in some places.
It reminds me greatly of the discussion that we had last time about whether or not the fibers on the ichthyosaur fossil went all the way up the edges of the flipper or not. And there's evidence for and not for that, but it's quite clear in the fossil of the shark impression that on sharks the fibers do in fact cover the entire edge of the flippers.
Yeah. Well, you know, some of this may come down to forensics. In other words, each individual fossil that dies and is fossilized goes through different stages of decomposition that are specific to that individual carcass. So we don't know if something has chewed on the ends of those fibers before they were fossilized or what's going on there.
That's a good point.
That has a lot to do with each individual fossil that is found. And then on top of that, you've got different geologic processes that happen to a fossil as it's being fossilized that can change things as well. So you're really opening up Pandora's box there. But anyway, as you can see, there is some similarity between fossilized Ceratotrichia and fossilized fibers in the exceptionally preserved flippers of fossilized marine reptiles. So, anyway, so let's move on now. What is pointed to on the ZUIYO MARU carcass as being probably the most sharky anatomical feature of it is the pectoral girdle. Let me bring up an image of that. Hang on. You guys are welcome to keep talking while I'm looking for stuff.
Well, while you're talking about that, actually, I was thinking about some of the comments about the carcass and the mentions of the caudal fins being in the wrong direction and the anal fin, and that there were missing dorsal fins in the places that there would be in the species of basking shark or whale shark. And I wonder what your thoughts are on that, really. I mean,
well,
is that really visible?
There really seems to be pretty good evidence that you can see a dorsal fin, which I will get to. Now, if you will look at this image I just sent you, you got a good view of the pectoral girdle and the attachment of the flippers to it on the carcass across the top. You see what I'm talking about? On the image I just sent?
Yep.
All right. The bottom image is a generalized version of a shark pectoral girdle. And as you can see, it's basically the girdle itself is a round piece of cartilage with an empty space at the top where it would attach to the spinal cord. And then the two fins attach at the sides. And the image that you see on the right is supposed to represent a rotated pectoral fin to show what it would look like sideways. And then the image on the left shows it looking at it long ways in the fin orientation. So as you can see, the pectoral girdle that you see on the ZUIYO MARU carcass greatly resembles a shark pectoral girdle.
Yeah.
The way
that looks
the
quite clear.
fins or flippers are oriented is also very similar, right?
The girdle is very clear. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, that establishes that whatever this thing was, it had a pectoral girdle and flippers or fins that resemble the shark. And that is one of the strongest arguments in favor of the shark theory.
Mm-hmm.
Now let's go to a different image and look at the condition in plesiosaurs for comparison. Let's see. All right. There are the two ZUIYO MARU images on the left. The image on the right is looking at a plesiosaur body from underneath the plesiosaur skeleton. And as you can see, the flippers are in a similar position, but the plesiosaur pectoral girdle is made up of at least 4 different bones. You see, you've got 2 upper ones, which are pieces of the scapula, and below that you have these other 2 bones below where the flippers attach, and those are called coracoid bones. So it's a somewhat different condition to the plesiosaur pectoral girdle, and the pelvic girdle of the plesiosaur, as you can see down at the bottom, is pretty much built the same way. And in between the 2 pectoral girdles, you have these, what they call gastral ribs or gastralia, which are belly ribs to protect the stomach from below. And it's believed that when the plesiosaurs swam and they moved their flippers up and down, the pectoral girdles would kind of swing in and out, and the belly ribs, the gastralia, would kind of move in an accordion-like movement. And there was a little bit of spinal flexure that also accentuated that. So that helped to build lift underwater to help the flippers propel the body.
Do we know if the flippers were able to rotate in the same way that we're seeing in the shark diagram?
I believe so. However, there's some debate about whether plesiosaurs could lift their flippers higher than the shoulder blade. There's still a lot of debate about that. In other words, they had a lot of flipper movement from front to back and from the shoulder blade down, range of movement. And apparently there was some kind of bony process where the humerus attached to the scapula that theoretically blocked upward movement above the height of the shoulder, but that's still being debated. So,
right, okay.
But more or less, I would say yes. But the main point I'm getting at here is that look at the difference between the plesiosaur pectoral girdle made up of all those bones and the pectoral girdle on the ZUIYO MARU carcass.
And not only that, but it leaves a very empty space. If that's the neck on top of the creature there, what's filling that space with the pectoral girdle is on the ZUIYO MARU carcass.
If you're looking at the plesiosaur image of the plesiosaur skeleton right there, as you can look and see above the pectoral girdle, you see the beginning of the neck vertebrae.
That's it.
Right there. So theoretically, you know, if a plesiosaur's neck was flopped over, it would look kind of like what you see on the ZUIYO MARU carcass, hanging up like that. But the main point I'm getting at here is look at the difference between the standard plesiosaur pectoral girdle and shark-like pectoral girdle on the ZUIYO MARU carcass.
And is the pectoral girdle the same in all discovered fossil plesiosaur species? Is there any variation?
Yeah, it's relatively the same thing. There was some difference between the pectoral girdle of the plesiosaur's ancestors, the nothosaurs, which does resemble more what you see on the ZUIYO MARU carcass, but still it's made of multiple bones. Let me find that image. Hang on.
Yeah.
All right. But that is one of the main arguments that the shark proponents have used to say that the ZUIYO MARU carcass was the shark is that pectoral girdle.
That's a
And
strong argument.
what you're looking at here on the right is a nothosaur, which was an ancestral type to the plesiosaur that still had feet with digits. But it was built very much like a plesiosaur, and as you can see, the pectoral girdle is a little different, but it's still made up of multiple bones.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I see.
Now, the thing you have to realize is that looking at the ZUIYO MARU carcass, we know that all of the internal organs were gone, and that everything between the pectoral girdle and the pelvic girdle on the belly region was gone as well. So we can't say for sure that if the ZUIYO MARU carcass was a reptile, that it didn't have these gastral ribs like you see on plesiosaurs. If it did, those were all already gone. So, you know, arguing about that is basically pointless.
Mm-hmm.
But the main thing here is that that pectoral girdle does look like a shark pectoral girdle, and it also looks like, of course, the pectoral girdle of a basking shark. So that's a
Do you have a... Sorry, go on, Karen.
argument for the shark.
No, you go ahead, Eddie.
Theory.
I was just going to say, Scott, do you have a picture of the pectoral girdle of a basking shark?
Yep, hang on. Bear with me. Just got to
Thanks.
dig it up. Oh, let's see here. Hold up here. You guys keep gibbering while I'm looking for
Yeah.
the picture.
What were you just about to say, Carrick?
Well, I was going to note, it reminds me very much of the sort of issue that we encounter when earlier in the talk, I think in part 1, we discussed the testimonies by some that there was some kind of bone or bone-like material in the carcass. And it really is a shame that no one bothered to make any particularly detailed anatomical sketch or photo of those bones, because it's already in debate whether or not the bones existed. But if they did, we don't know what kind of bones they were. We don't know where in the body they were found.
Do you see the image on the lower right of the shark skeleton? That is a basking shark.
Okay.
And if you look, you can see behind the jaws and the gills where the pectoral flipper is, and you can see that girdle connected to the spinal cord. You see what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I do.
And I've also got an image, hang on, of the pectoral girdle of the Stronza beast. So let me just find that real quick.
Mm-hmm.
All right. And it's generally assumed, based on Holmes' arguments, that the Stronza beast was a basking shark.
An outsized one.
Perhaps, according to his data, compared with the other shark that he had examined, he thought they were roughly the same size, in the range of like 30-something feet, 36 feet maybe.
But that was based upon the skull that he examined, right? So he didn't see
Well, he
the
had
carcass.
skull and vertebrae.
Yeah. Which he estimated the length.
The image on the upper right is the pectoral girdle and pectoral appendage of the Stronza beast.
Okay.
And below that, you have another image of a shark pectoral girdle.
Okay. Yeah.
Now, interestingly enough, you see a condition in a mosasaur that is closer to what you see on the ZUIYO MARU carcass. Now, let me find that real quick.
interesting.
Yeah. But it is also made up of multiple bones. So, we don't know if we're dealing with a reptile here, and this descended from a plesiosaur or a mosasaur or something like that. What 60 million years could have done? It could have fused the bones and changed things. We just don't know.
Yeah.
But based on what we know for sure, looking around in the world today, that pectoral girdle looks like a shark pectoral girdle. So in other words, that's a strong argument for those who argue that the carcass is a mutilated shark, most likely a basking shark. So.
Right, yeah, and it definitely, the notion that you bring up about bones fusing over time is interesting because that nososaur that we just looked at, you could tell by looking at the skeletal structure of those appendages that even though they're not flippers yet, they're slanted in the same direction as flippers, and they're getting rather narrow too. So what you're seeing there is probably the transition between more fleshed out appendages and the flipper. So, talking about time frames and how they change bone structure, there's a great example right there.
Yeah, well, if you look at the image I just sent, that is the pectoral mosasaur, which, as you can see, more resembles what you see on the ZUIYO MARU carcass, but that is still in itself made of multiple bones, like the plesiosaur pectoral girdle. So do you see what I'm saying there?
I do. In Scott, in the Yano, Chihiko Yano sketch, even though the dimensions that he recorded were off with the original sketch, would you say that's reflected in his sketch of the skeletal structure of the creature that he observed?
He doesn't really have a good drawing of the pectoral girdle in his sketches. However, one thing I did find that I forgot I'd had is there is a second sketch that he did that shows the rear appendages. We'll get to that. It's very interesting.
That's interesting.
Let me show you what the bones of the pectoral girdle of the mosasaur look like, broke down into different pieces.
Okay.
I just got to find it. As you see it there in that image put together, it does look kind of like what you see on the ZUIYO MARU carcass.
Yeah.
But if you see it broke down to its separate pieces, it's very different.
Yeah. And of course, then the head and neck is all wrong. If it's a mosasaur, then we're at the ballpark again.
We will be getting to the head and the neck and comparison with plesiosaurs and all that very shortly. Right now, I just want to concentrate on this pectoral girdle because that is one of the main features that is pointed to as saying, see, it's a shark.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
it's strong. I mean, I think that's very strong.
As much as we would like this to be a reptile, trying to avoid the shark arguments is not going to get us anywhere. To have any credibility, we've got to look at this stuff head on and say, well, it could be a shark.
I don't know how you feel, Carrick, but this to me seems to be the strongest piece of shark evidence so far.
Yeah, I would say that it's probably that, and also the circumstances of basking sharks being mistaken for plesiosaurs, because it's just so it's such a precedent. It's such a significant precedent, and I'm not sure if I would say that it scientifically should count as evidence that it's a shark. But it's one of those things when you personally examine something that you're like, oh, I'd better watch out for this because this has happened plenty of times before, sort of thing.
Yeah. Now, the image I just sent you is a mosasaur pectoral girdle broke down into its constituent parts. And what you're looking at on the top is the left scapula, the right scapula, the two humerus bones, and the one on the left has the radius and ulna and the toe bones attached to it. And then below that, you've got the left coracoid and the right coracoid. So they had the coracoid bones like you see in a plesiosaur, but they were shaped somewhat different. And when it was all put together, I believe the two coracoids were leaned backwards toward the tail under the body, which would give it that circular shape that you see in the other image, which resembles the ZUIYO MARU pectoral girdle. But as you can see, if you break it down into different parts, it looks very different. In other words, it's not one piece like you see on the ZUIYO MARU carcass.
Yeah.
One thing I can say is that it appears that the pectoral girdle of the ZUIYO MARU carcass is all one piece. But we don't know for sure, because that could be covered in some kind of skin, and it might actually be made of more than one bone.
Yeah, sure. Well,
but it sure as hell looks like a shark pectoral girdle. So, you know.
Yeah, it certainly does. Wouldn't that be funny if a plesiosaur had decomposed to look like a shark as opposed to a shark decomposing into a plesiosaur?
Well, I don't know if that's possible, but you know,
do you think that was?
I believe there's evidence that's been coming to light lately that says that plesiosaurs were much more sharky than we originally used to think. And that's certainly the case with mosasaurs, because it was only a few years ago that they discovered that mosasaurs had shark-like caudal flukes. And now some people have even started speculating that mosasaurs might have had dorsal fins as well. Which, you know, the original idea of what a mosasaur was more like a moray eel, like a Komodo dragon built like a moray eel. Now it's starting to look like they're much more sharky animals than we ever assumed.
Interesting.
Now, I have an image also of the pectoral girdle of an ichthyosaur, and it's very much like what you see on the mosasaur. I'll just bring that up just so we're covered on all the main marine reptile bases here. Let's see. So I don't want our critics to be able to say, well, oh, you didn't discuss this and you didn't discuss that. I'm trying to tear this thing apart like a car engine.
Absolutely.
Right. Well, you know, it's like we're doing an autopsy on a mystery, so to speak.
Exactly.
Here.
Yeah. That's what we're doing here. Somebody needed to do it.
Looking at that as well, both. Sorry, Carrick. I was wondering about the phalanges as well, because even in Yano's sketch and in the pictures of the fins that we see, it doesn't really seem to show the presence.
Well, the only
phalanges,
evidence,
and you would
the only evidence that came forward to suggest there might have been phalange in the ZUIYO MARU flipper or fin is that somebody, perhaps Yano, I can't remember off the top of my head, but somebody stepped on one of the flippers while it was laying on the deck and said that it felt like there were hard materials inside it.
Oh, okay.
Which is ambiguous, but still, that's partial.
It's
you know,
something. Yeah.
It could imply that
right.
there was
It's
some
something
kind of
that could have been fatty
partial
tissue, could have been ocean debris. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you know, we know from the fossils that we've been discussing that plesiosaurs and ichthyosaurs had flippers with bones in them that were covered in collagen fibers on top of that. And we've seen the images of these fibers hanging out the side of plesiosaur and ichthyosaur flippers. So just because there were fibers hanging out of the fins or flippers of the ZUIYO MARU carcass does not mean that there could not have been flipper bones underneath that inside the flipper that we didn't see.
I see.
So, you know,
But he doesn't record it.
There's no
in his
evidence
sketch.
one way or the other for either case, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
But
it's an
Yano
open
doesn't
question.
record it in his sketch, Scott, does he?
What you're looking at here, the sketch I just sent you, is the pectoral girdle of an ichthyosaur.
Yeah, sure.
And as you can see, it's got the scapula and the coracoid bones. Yeah, so it's pretty much like sort of a variation on what you see in the plesiosaur and the mosasaur. So
very interesting.
It seems like
all we can say at the end of the day is that the pectoral girdle of the ZUIYO MARU carcass looked like that of a shark. Oh, wait a minute. There's one more animal we haven't looked at, the leatherback turtle. Hang on. And the pectoral girdle of the turtle is even more complex than what you see on these other ones. All right, hang on. So I think probably what we need to do next is the dorsal fin. And we'll go over the evidence for that. But let me just get this turtle pectoral girdle up there real quick.
Let's have a look at that.
If I can find it. Let's see here. All right. That is the leatherback turtle.
Okay. Oh, yeah. Okay.
I think I actually have a better image. Hang on. Bear with me.
Thanks.
It definitely follows that same kind of general, almost diamond-shaped pectoral skeletal structure.
Yeah, well, as you can see, the condition in reptiles is much more complex. All right. This image is a leatherback turtle viewed from underneath. Now, as you can see, one thing about the leatherback, it's got a very short humerus bone and really big flippers. And the shoulders, the pectoral girdle is very close to the head. So if you see a live leatherback, it looks like the flippers are coming out right at the base of the neck, which is pretty much well the case. But as you can see, like the other marine reptiles, the pectoral girdle is made up of several bones. And it's even more obscured looking at it from this perspective because you've got these belly ribs on the bottom of the leatherback turtle, which are obscuring the view of the pectoral girdle. But as you can see, it's very different from what you see on the ZUIYO MARU carcass. Even though the ZUIYO MARU carcass had many turtle-like features, which is also a common theme with mutilated basking sharks, which we'll get to eventually. So, can we take a short break here?
Sure, absolutely.
All right.
Sure thing.
Thank you.
It's very interesting stuff. I
Yep.
can't wait to get onto the dorsal fin.
Yeah.
And also, Scott,
Okay, we're back. Now, probably the most sharky feature of the ZUIYO MARU carcass that people point to, besides the pectoral girdle and its arrangement, is the presumed dorsal fin. Which, let me bring up these images. As you can see, what I've got here in this first image is an image of, on the left, is a basking shark hanging up on the deck of a ship in a similar manner to what you see with the ZUIYO MARU carcass, which is the image on the right. You can see that the basking shark is slumped over with its head hanging down, and then coming down the right side of the body, you see the dorsal fin. Above that, on the left side of the carcass, you see the left pectoral appendage. Coming down the middle part of the body, you see a relief section, and that is assumed to be the flanks, muscle flanks of the basking shark. And then down below that, you see either a second dorsal fin or a pelvic fin, probably a second dorsal fin. Anyway, if you compare that image and the way it's orientated with the image of the ZUIYO MARU carcass on the right, you see on the ZUIYO MARU carcass, you see the head and neck portion flopped over, which could, if you say that the ZUIYO MARU carcass was a rotting basking shark missing the jaws and the gills, would be somewhat analogous to that head of that basking shark leaning over. Then you come down the center part of the back, or the portion you see on the rear, seems to match up with that muscle flanks section that you see on the basking shark. However, it could also be interpreted as possibly the spinal column.
Yeah.
And then you see what appears to be, on the ZUIYO MARU carcass, some kind of a fin laid over to the right. And that looks like it's in the same position, roughly, as the dorsal fin that you see on the basking shark, which is hanging up on the other side. So you can see the analogies right there.
Yeah.
If you're arguing that the ZUIYO MARU carcass was a mutilated basking shark, then what you're looking at is the dorsal fin, the flanks of the body falling apart, and the head missing the jaws and the gill apparatus with just the neurocranium. So, you know, going the other direction, in 1905, off the coast of Brazil, some kind of unknown animal was seen by two scientists on a research cruise, and they published a report about it in the Zoological Society of London for the year 1905. The animal that they described had like a 6-foot neck with a turtle-like head and some kind of a rectangular dorsal fin. So that kind of resembles what you see in the ZUIYO MARU picture too. So, you know, the fact that it had a dorsal fin is, on one level, a very strong argument that it probably was a shark, but then at the same time, the most credible sea serpent sighting of all time that you have describes an animal with a turtle-like head, which you see on the ZUIYO MARU carcass, a 6-foot plesiosaur-like neck, which you also see on the ZUIYO MARU carcass, and some kind of a dorsal fin. So you can take this either way. But now there has been debate about whether that was a dorsal fin. Hang on a second here, and I'll bring up another image that goes over the different arguments.
I would love to know exactly what it means that both the images of the ZUIYO MARU carcass and the hanging basking shark, what the reason is that both of them have this kind of ridged side to their to the left facing part of their body. And
well, the thing about fish axial trunk muscles is that they're made of folds of connective tissue between the different muscle segments, which they call myocomata.
I see. So is what we're seeing.
Myocomata exists in amphibians and primitive reptiles as well. But it's not as folded as what you see in fish musculature. And some of the arguments in the scientific papers argued that if that split that you see on the back of the body is the flank of the muscles where they meet, the axial trunk musculature, you see what looks like deep folds in the muscles, which seems to indicate that it's got an axial musculature with deep folds in it like a fish, which was another argument used to say that the ZUIYO MARU carcass was a shark. But there's other arguments that may question whether that is a flank of the animal and not the spinal column. Okay, I just sent you an image that's got 3 quotes from 3 different papers, and it's got a sketch that was done for one of them. Now I'm going to read from those different quotes of the different interpretations of that, quote, dorsal fin. Some people were of the opinion that it wasn't a dorsal fin, that what looks like a dorsal fin leaned over on top of a right pectoral fin is in actuality just one large fin, and it just looks like a dorsal fin. So bear with me, I've just got to bring up that card so I can read it. Okay, the first quote is from the paper by Obata and Tomoda. And as you know, they were the ones that argued that it could be an unidentified reptile. Okay, here's what they had to say. It says, in the 4 photographs taken on the deck, the skull, neck, and anterior fin can be readily distinguished. Though the photograph taken from the back appears to show a partly broken right posterior fin overlaying an almost complete right anterior fin, this judgment was denied by Yano, who stated that the fin is the right anterior fin, which has an unusual structure in having exposed rays near its base as well as on its edge. So what they're saying here is that Yano himself said that that was not a dorsal fin. Okay, you see the illustration on the right, right?
Yeah.
Okay, you've got the dorsal fin is marked A, and then the pectoral fin in front of it is marked B. Okay, so basically what they're saying is that Yano said that A and B were not 2 separate flippers, but that A was the base of B, and it was all one flipper. So that's from Yano himself. So
Okay.
Yano was arguing that that was not a dorsal fin. Moving on to one of the other papers, this is one of the other papers called On the Nature of the Carcass of a Large Vertebrate Found Off New Zealand by Yoshikazu Hasegawa and Teruya Uyeno. And here's what they say. It says, what may be the decisive factor can be observed in the photograph showing the dorsal aspect of the creature. The structure hanging down on the right side of the mid side of the body appears to be the dorsal fin and not the pectoral fin, as some believe. The position is too high and close to the vertebral column to be the pectoral fin. If this observation is correct, then there is no doubt that this creature is a shark. Based on the available evidence, we are convinced that this New Zealand creature is not the new Nessie that much of the world was hoping for, but more than likely or carcass belonging to a large-sized shark. So, this is interesting. They're saying that fin marked A could not be a pectoral fin because it's too close to the spinal column. Now, are they saying that that split going down the middle is the spinal column? Which makes it even more ambiguous.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you see, that's where I'm going with all this, is that so much of this is hard to interpret, and even the scientists themselves had contradictory interpretations of basic features that you see in the photographs. Okay, moving on to the third paper, which is called Identification of the Carcass Trawled by the ZUIYO MARU from a Comparative Morphological Viewpoint, written by Hideo Omura, Koshi Mochizuki, and Toshiro Kamiya. Here's what they said. It says, though the dorsal fin has not been mentioned by the eyewitnesses, nor was it shown in the sketch, the whole shape of a dorsal fin can be recognized in one of the photographs. Yano pointed out that the right pectoral fin had a large number of fibers near its base as well as along its margin. However, by a close examination of the photograph, we can clearly distinguish the base of a dorsal fin, though it had slipped from the mid-dorsal line, and numerous rays hanging down from its rounded tip. It seems that the pectoral fin was overlaid by a dorsal fin, thus presenting the appearance of an extremely long fin. Only this assumption can account for the unnatural appearance of the pectoral fin. At the base of the dorsal fin appear exposed structures that are judged to be fin rays. The dorsal fin appears to be as long as the pectoral fin. So there you go.
Wow.
Now, one thing I'd like to bring up here. Hang on. Oh, go ahead. Please comment while I'm looking for a picture.
Well, it just seems to me, basically, that this all really hinges upon whether we are looking at the spinal column to the far left of the picture that you've compared with the basking shark, or if the spinal column is actually running along the side, closer to where the claimed dorsal fin is supposed to be. And
well, that's the problem.
Yeah.
You know.
But it seems to me that what we're seeing on the other side, and I know there's another explanation for it, but it would make sense.
You know, if the carcass is twisted sideways, then, you know, it makes sense that it could be the flank of the animal with the muscle parts.
Absolutely.
Spreading apart.
I agree with that.
But
yeah, I agree
now
with
look
that.
at this image. What you got here is on the bottom is the ZUIYO MARU carcass. On the top is some kind of a lizard, and you can look down the middle of the lizard's back and see similar muscle folds of ribs or whatever you see under the skin there. And it looks somewhat like what you see on the ZUIYO MARU carcass there, right?
Yeah.
The two images on the right are alligator carcasses.
Yeah.
Then the one on the extreme left is a mud puppy salamander, showing the myocomata in its muscles.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's ambiguous. Now, the interesting thing is, if you say that that split is the spinal column, why is that dorsal fin laying so far over to the right?
Exactly.
Which is another problematic aspect of this, that if you look at the way the dorsal fin, or presumed dorsal fin, is so far away from that split, it kind of makes more sense that that is the side of the animal with the muscle flanks, the axial musculature splitting apart, but still it's ambiguous.
Yeah.
But anyway, you see where I'm going with all this, right?
Absolutely.
So, do you think that if there is a dorsal fin, its position is due to decomposition, maybe?
Possibly, yeah. You know, it could be it slipped out from the attachments that hold it to the spinal column
Okay.
could be pulled out. I don't know how that works. You'd have
Okay.
to have a forensic expert that could tell you how that works. I don't have the forensic know-how to say whether that's possible or not. So, I don't know. But what I'm saying here is, here's evidence from reptiles showing reptile spinal columns that is suggestive enough for you to say, well, maybe it could be the spinal column. So I don't know. I mean, I see merit in both sides of the arguments.
Yeah, I would agree.
Which is another illustration about why the photographs, they're good photographs, but they're still blurry, and the state of decomposition that the carcass was in is such a mess that just analyzing the photographs alone is never going to settle the case. That's why it is so important to try to find a remaining piece of this carcass to resolve this question, if it's possible, on a molecular level. That will settle the question. In other words, the biological makeup of the DNA of whatever this thing was, if it can be retrieved from a surviving fiber, will settle the question. It doesn't matter if the photographs look like Mickey Mouse or not. Whatever it is, biologically, molecular technology should be able to resolve it.
Yeah, no, that's true. Assuming that the samples are still intact, they're usable.
Well, like I said, now they can get a DNA basking shark signature from a bowl of soup. So if they could do that, I would think they would be able to get something from this fiber.
I hope so.
If it's been preserved for 40 years, well enough, we'll see. We got to establish first that there's still some that exist today.
Yeah.
There were some 25 years ago, but 25 years ago is a long time, so.
Certainly is.
Right.
I don't know. We've still got a gauntlet to run here.
Yeah, that's true.
Well, that's about all we can say about the dorsal fin. I guess when we come back, we'll attack the neck vertebrae and the skull.
Yeah.
Which are very important pieces to look at. There's
Scott,
a lot of complex analysis of that as well.
Yeah. What was the?
Go ahead.
What was the reported size? And I've read it a few times. I've read a few different things about the size. 32.
32 feet based on the measurements that Yano did, yes.
So it's not really outside of the realms of any sort of basking shark at all, really.
Well, no, actually, their basking sharks are believed to reach around the length of 40 feet, so.
That's right.
Just about right, actually.
Yeah.
Interesting.
It's compelling. The pectoral girdle, that's really smashed me tonight, but I'm hoping for better news with the head and neck.
Well, it is what it is.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, my goal was to sit down and have an honest discussion about this carcass and to present both sides of the arguments to the best of my ability, and I think I've done that.
I think you have. I mean, the argument without philosophical slant, especially in this case, is something that's been needed for so long, because everybody who takes it on, they've got an axe to grind, for want of a better expression.
The pro-shark people don't want you to talk about the reptile evidence.
Exactly.
And the plesiosaur people don't want you to talk about the shark evidence. So, it's a no-win situation. It's a thankless. Okay, we're back. The thing I want to pick up with here is going back to the pectoral girdle. Another sharky feature connected to that is you can see the fins appear to be rather thin, like shark fins, as opposed to the thickness you would expect to see from something like the flipper of a plesiosaur or a seal or a whale or a sea turtle. Now, I just sent you guys a picture. You can see that, right?
Yeah, we can.
It's the same image I was using before.
Mm.
Am I getting an echo?
Yeah, you are.
Might be on my end, sorry.
All right. Can you hear me good now?
Yeah, perfect.
All right, so looking at the comparison image which we've used before, you can see how thin the pectoral fin of a shark is, looking at it sideways. And if you look at the comparison pictures of the carcass, you can see that right fin or flipper is broken at one point. You see how it flops over in the middle?
Yeah, I see that.
It's broken. And you can see that in both images. So that would appear to be rather thin. And it would also, you would think, if that was a plesiosaur or an animal with a flipper built like a plesiosaur, you would see bones hanging out there. But I don't know. I mean, we look at the preserved fossil flipper of a plesiosaur with fibers hanging out of it, and you didn't see the bones hanging out, so I don't know. It depends on, what the particular circumstance of that flipper is that you see on the carcass. Now, to try to resolve that question, we're going to look at some images comparing the carcass flipper with the flippers of sea lions and leatherback turtles and whales. Now, let me just get the images up here. Let's see. All right, hang on. Okay, the image on the right is a sea lion jumping out of the water. And it's particularly interesting to use a sea lion because sea lions are one of the living animals that paleontologists compare plesiosaurs to, because sea lions swim through the water with their flippers like plesiosaurs did. And as you can see in this particular image, you can see the pectoral flipper of the sea lion from a sideways angle. And as you can see, it appears to be relatively thin, like what you see on the carcass flipper or fin. You can see the comparison, right?
Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah, and that has me thinking, is it particularly that the flippers and fins of marine reptiles are especially thick, or is that the wrong kind of classification?
Well, the only living example we have to look at are sea turtles.
So we wouldn't really know how thick they would be from the fossil remains.
Well, a lot of the soft tissue reconstructions of these extinct or presumably extinct marine reptiles are guesses. The only evidence there is to work with are these exceptional cases where soft tissue is preserved around the edges of the flippers, but we really don't know how thick they were, because usually what's preserved is you're looking at it laying flat. So, all we can do at this point is guess.
Right.
But
And what about the descriptions given by alleged eyewitnesses of living plesiosaurs? Are there any very descriptive flipper accounts out there?
not that I can think of off the top of my head. I'm sure there are. I know there have been observations, very rarely, of flippers on the Loch Ness Monster, supposedly.
Yeah.
But I can't point to anything specific at this particular moment.
Yeah,
I mean,
can't think of an actual description of width
I'd have to dig through all the literature again,
Yeah.
But let me bring up the leatherback turtle flippers. Let's see. Well, here's one image, and that upper left is the ZUIYO MARU flipper laying on the deck of the ship. So, it's kind of ambiguous. Some of these flippers look rather thin, and other ones look sort of thick, but I don't know,
Yeah, and there's definitely probably decomposition, but there is also that kind of lack of rigidity in the ZUIYO MARU flippers.
Yeah. Well, I have another image too. Hang on. Let me see here. The sea turtle flipper evidence is kind of ambiguous, I think. Like, particularly this one right here looks rather thin. So, maybe...
Oh, yeah.
Maybe, I don't know. Maybe their weight fluctuates and it possibly affects the thickness of their flippers. I don't know.
Easily distribution.
I don't think anybody does. But recently, there was some computer animation done of a plesiosaur. Now, I don't know how much stock you can put into this. This is computer animation, which when you go into computer animation, you may be striving to be anatomically and scientifically correct. But in an area where we don't have a whole lot of knowledge, it may not be that reliable. There was a nice piece of computer animation done recently of a swimming Dolica ringcops, which is one of the smaller plesiosaurian-looking plesiosaurs with a dolphin's-like bill on it. And this particular video has rather thin-looking flippers. Now, let me upload the video here. Hang on. It's real short, so... Let me see here. See that?
Not just yet.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, okay.
Yeah, so...
This is with the turtle carcass.
No. There's a video I just uploaded right after.
Yeah.
Oh, wait, no. Okay, here it is. It's popped up.
I've seen this animation. I might be mistaken. I think this was made for a science exhibit in a museum somewhere. So hopefully this is...
Yeah, but as you can see, the flippers in the animation appear to be rather thin looking. Kind of like what you see on the ZUIYO MARU carcass. It's ambiguous, but I did put together a comparison. Hang on.
Yeah. I just wonder if the turtle comparison is our best guess is just a poor comparison.
Well, I don't know. I mean, leatherback turtles are the closest model we have to compare a living animal to a plesiosaur, but it's still not perfect. There are a lot of differences.
I mean, just looking at those pictures, it makes the ZUIYO MARU flipper look more shark-like than ever before, really.
Well, it is what it is. At least nobody can say that we didn't look into this question.
Yeah.
Whether it's
exactly
whether it supports the shark idea or the possibility of a marine reptile, at least we're looking at it honestly, and we're not twisting it to fit the answer that we want.
That's true.
Absolutely.
And one last interesting thing, and this really illustrates how ambiguous the photographic evidence alone is let me show you this. There is the appearance of a bone in one of the pictures attached to one of, or to the, I guess, looking at it from that angle, it would be the left pectoral appendage. You can see the pectoral girdle, and you see a broken piece of bone leaning over inside.
Yes, I see it.
The pectoral girdle. Now that looks like the humerus bone of a plesiosaur, which you can see in the illustration. Now you see what I'm getting at there?
Yeah, I do.
Now that's very interesting, but it's open to more than one interpretation. Let me bring up another image. Okay, what you're looking at there on the right is the pectoral girdle of a basking shark, but it's kind of broke up into chunks, and it's got broken pieces on it. So what I'm saying here is that that bone that may look like a humerus may just be part of the pectoral girdle that is broken and leaning over. I don't know. But the whole point of this is that just based on the photographs, you can't be 100% sure of what you're looking at. Is the point I'm trying to make here.
I suppose you could say in the previous photo, actually, that shows the broken bone leaning into the area that
well,
would
you can sort
actually
of
be
see
the
it in the
pectoral
other
girdle.
picture too. You can sort of see it in the other picture, but not quite as well. But
yeah,
it certainly looks like the humerus bone of a plesiosaur. So.
It does, but additionally, if you just straightened that bone out and looked at the shape on the other side of the pectoral girdle, it would complete that shape in a circle, actually. So it could really look a bit more just like the...
Well, yeah, but...
The girdle is, snapped and it's leaning inwards.
You see, that's the main point I'm trying to make here is that these carcasses, not only shark carcasses, but whale carcasses and other carcasses, wash up, and you're not sure sometimes what anatomical features that you're looking at because the carcass is so deteriorated. And that's why the genetic molecular evidence is so important, because that gets around that problem.
Yeah.
And that's why we, if there's any pieces of this carcass left, that's why we need to be concentrating on trying to find them so they can be analyzed using this new molecular technology that didn't exist in 1977, 1978. We might be able to get a final answer.
Yeah, that would be great.
So if
they ever answer the phone.
Yeah. The next anatomical feature I wanted to move on to was the neck, or what appears to be a neck. Now let me set this up here. All right. We're going to be talking about another carcass. What you're looking at here is a carcass that washed up in Parker's Cove, Nova Scotia in 2002. And it's the Parker's Cove monster. And it was confirmed to be a basking shark. Now, let me bring up the paper about that, and I will go into about how they determined that this was definitely a basking shark. Bear with me here a second.
right off the bat, there's just so many, especially in the head area and the flippers. There's so many similarities to the ZUIYO MARU carcass.
Yeah. Well, that's important because that carcass was definitely a basking shark. And some of the things I'm going to be going over relative to that carcass is strong evidence pointing toward the ZUIYO MARU possibly being a basking shark.
Interesting.
Yeah. So, this is the technique that was used to figure out that the Parker's Cove monster was a basking shark. I'm going to read the abstract of this paper. This is from 2007. It's called Genetic Tracking of Basking Shark Products in International Trade. And the thing you have to realize is that basking sharks are protected now in certain places. So let me read this abstract real quick. Mounting evidence that sharks are being overfished to supply shark fin markets is causing widespread concern about the sustainability of these practices. The basking shark, Cedorhinus maximus, whose fins command high market prices, has proven especially sensitive to exploitation. To prevent further population declines, this species is now protected in the territorial waters of several countries and is listed on Appendix 2 of the Convention of International Trade in Endangered Species, requiring monitoring of trade in its products by all parties to CITES, which is the initials of that Convention of International Trade in Endangered Species. Tracking trade in basking shark products, however, is often hampered by difficulties in identifying shark products to species of origin. Here we present the development and application of a streamlined genetic forensics assay that does not require DNA sequencing to identify basking shark products. The dual primer species-specific polymerase chain reaction strategy provides diagnostic redundancy for robustness in legal venues. It is also effective for identifying basking shark products regardless of geographic origin, an important consideration given the global distribution of the species and the international sourcing of fins to the trade. Applications of the assay confirm the presence of basking shark fins in the Hong Kong and Japanese markets and indicated an apparent relationship between the Chinese fin trader category Nuo Wei Tianju and fins from basking sharks. The assay was also used in a law enforcement investigation to document illegal trade in basking shark fins in the United States, where this species is prohibited from harvest and trade. These trade detections suggest that high market value of basking shark fins is continuing to drive the exploitation, surreptitious and otherwise, of this highly threatened species, underscoring the need for improved trade monitoring. The streamlined assay developed here can be an assist in monitoring conservation on a worldwide scale. Okay, let me get to this. Let me see here. Maybe easier just to go to the other paper. Hang on. Bear with me. Okay, this is a paper from... Oh, God, hang on. Looking for a date on this. I think it's 2014. No, 2015. Okay. This is called a novel mini DNA barcoding assay to identify processed fins from internationally protected shark species. But it's talking about the same technique. It says, there is growing need to identify shark products in trade, in part due to the recent listing of 5 commercially protected species on the appendices of the Convention of International Trade in Endangered Species. These include the poor beagle, oceanic white-tip, scalloped hammerhead, smooth hammerhead, and great hammerhead, in addition to 3 species listed in the early part of the century: the basking shark, the white shark, and the whale shark. Shark fins are traded internationally to supply the Asian dried seafood market, in which they are used to make the luxury dish, shark fin soup. Shark fins usually enter international trade with their skin still intact and can be identified using morphological characters or standard DNA barcoding approaches. Once they reach Asia and are traded in this region, the skin is removed and they are treated with chemicals that eliminate many key diagnostic characters and degrade their DNA. Here we present a validated mini barcode assay based on partial sequences of the cytochrome oxidase 1 gene that can be reliably used to identify the processed fins of 7 of the 8 CITES-listed shark species. We also demonstrate that the assay can even frequently identify the species or genus of shark from a bowl of shark fin soup.
Wow.
So, they're using this cytochrome oxidase 1 gene, and they're also using another gene called cytochrome B. Now let me go to the paper about the genetic analysis on the Parker's Cove monster. Okay, this is from CEN Technical Journal in 2005 by Pierre Julstrom and Henry DeRoos, and these are a couple of microbiologists that also happen to be creationists, but they're making the argument that the ZUIYO MARU carcass was a shark, which is sort of a thing that's popped up in the creationist community lately, because they think that using the argument that the ZUIYO MARU carcass was a plesiosaur to further the creationist argument is an error. So they're trying to push back and say that, no, it was a shark. So anyway, getting to the DNA analysis of the Parker's Cove monster, which proved that it was a basking shark. Let me get to that part. Let's see. We're coming back to the anatomy of it, but first I want to establish that this was definitely, based on the DNA, was a basking shark. Okay, here we go. DNA sequencing. If Parky was indeed a basking shark, this would be confirmed by its DNA. Professor Herman and Dr. Don Stewart from Acadia University obtained a tissue sample from Parky, from which they extracted some DNA and carried out PCR polymerase chain reaction analysis using some basking shark specific DNA primers, BSCYTHF2 and BSCYTBR1. The primers had been developed by a UK laboratory to help check for basking shark products and derivatives in commercial products because of concerns of a worldwide decline in basking shark numbers. These primers have been shown to have a high specificity for basking shark DNA, as they need to stand up to legal scrutiny. The primers are based on Cedronus maximus basking shark cytochrome B gene, a mitochondrial gene that encodes mitochondrial protein. According to the strategy, if the PCR results prove to be negative, this would mean that Parky was not a basking shark and further analysis would need to be carried out in order to identify what type of creature it was. According to Herman, when tested, the samples were consistently and unequivocally positive. The DNA amplified very strongly, indicating a match with a basking shark. There is now little doubt in my mind, based on the DNA evidence, that Parky was indeed a basking shark. In order to double check that the amplified DNA fragment did indeed correspond to cytochrome B gene, its DNA sequence was analyzed. The sequence procedure was able to resolve 148 out of 186 bases, 80% of the amplified fragment. A BLAST search, basic local alignment search tool, a method for rapid searching of nucleotide and protein databases with this sequence, most closely matched that of basking shark cytochrome B gene with 146 matching bases out of 148, i.e. 99% similarity. It is also interesting to note that the 7 most similar sequences in the BLAST search were cytochrome genes from other sharks. Sequences from 123 down to 119 bases in length, with 89% to 87% identity, such as longfin mako, great white shark, and big-eyed thresher. The PCR analysis therefore unequivocally confirms a basking shark identity for Parky. All right, so we've established that the Parker's Cove was definitely a basking shark, right?
I mean, it makes sense to me. I can't see any way around it.
Yeah, okay. Well, now that's the important thing. Now we're going back to the anatomical features. Hang on. I've got an image here I need to upload. Let's see. Okay, hang on. Bear with me here. So what's your reaction to this?
Well, I was just thinking during that, the methods used to identify Parky, as it's called, were those the same methods that were used to analyze the ZUIYO MARU carcass in some cases, or are those different methods?
Well, what I'm saying is that DNA analysis cytochrome B gene comparison technique did not exist in the 70s.
I see.
Popped up probably maybe late 90s, 1998, somewhere in there.
Got it. Yeah,
so that's what I'm saying is now, with this technique they've got, they can identify basking shark elastoidin from a bowl of soup. Mm-hmm. So even if the ZUIYO MARU carcass fiber, if it still exists, or a fiber exists, has been sitting around for 40 years, they may still be able to get a DNA sequence out of it, or at least a partial one. They might be able to, confirm that it was a basking shark just from one fiber. I mean, if they can identify it from a bowl of soup, I would imagine this would be a lot better method to use,
Yeah, I mean, you have the complete intact fibers to base it upon. Yeah, it would be amazing. It would be amazing if it was intact, if it exists.
Do you see the image I just sent?
Yeah.
Yeah, right. And I was going to say, the heads are so similar.
Yeah, well, nobody's disputing that. This is all evidence that people point to and say, see, it was a basking shark, because look at it compared to other basking sharks. Anyway, what you're looking at here is on the left is, of course, the ZUIYO MARU carcass. At the top is the Parker's Cove monster. Below that is a carcass that washed up in New Zealand, I believe in 1999, at a place called Kaikoura. So in the same paper about the Parker's Cove monster, Bjurlstrom and Henry DeRoos made a chart comparing the anatomical measurements and features of the ZUIYO MARU carcass with the anatomical features of the Parkus cove monster and the Kaikoura carcass. And this is important concerning the neck of the ZUIYO MARU carcass and compared to basking sharks. But before we get to that chart, let me bring something else up here. Okay. Let's see. Okay, at the top, you see two photographs of the neck of the ZUIYO MARU carcass that have been oriented sideways, right?
See it.
Okay, the two middle images are two basking shark carcasses. The one on the left is the Cherbourg monster from 1934 from France. And the one on the right is a carcass that washed up in a place called Girvan, Scotland in 1953. These are generally considered to have been basking sharks. In the case of the Cherbourg monster, they actually kept the cranium and some of the vertebrae, which proved it was a basking shark. I'm not 100% sure about the Girvan monster, but the general consensus is that it was a basking shark. And then below that, you've got the heads and necks of a couple of plesiosaurs. Now, what you can see, you look at a typical long-necked plesiosaur, and you see that the neck is made up of a lot of bones. You can see that from the pictures, right?
Yes.
All right, so cervical count on plesiosaurs varies widely. The shortest neck plesiosaur that they know of, which was a pliosaur, one of the ones with the large heads, was a pliosaur called Brachiocaneus. It only had 13 vertebrae. Going to the other extreme, you had Styxosaurus with somewhere between 72 and 76 neck vertebrae. This animal, this elasmosaur, had a neck twice the length of its body. So that's going from one extreme to the other. And in between those two extremes, you had entire different grades going from one to the other of different neck lengths and head sizes, which I can demonstrate with this image. This is an image I put together a couple of years ago to show going from Brachiocaneus, going down, and then picking up at the top of the right, you can see going from Brachiocaneus all the way to an elasmosaur. So what you're looking at there is the biodiversity of plesiosaurs in one image.
Awesome.
So you can see that there was, they talk about, the old school idea was that, well, there were two types of plesiosaurs. There were ones with short necks and big heads, and then there were ones with long necks and small heads. Well, actually, there's a whole series going from one extreme to the other. And these different morphologies have evolved in different lineages over the entire 100 million year span that we know of the fossil record of plesiosaurs. So, it really is a mess. But for our purposes, the main thing we need to establish here is that the shortest neck plesiosaur had a neck with 13 vertebrae in it, right?
Right.
Okay, now getting back to the Parker's Code paper. Hang on. This is a chart that Henry DeRoos and Pierre Gilstrom put together comparing those three carcasses that I was talking about. Now let me open up the paper again so I can see it good and read you what it says. Okay, bear with me here a second. All right. Can you see that chart good?
Yep, see that well.
Mhm.
All right. Across the top, going from left to right, it says measurements of organs. Column 1 is ZM carcass, which is the ZUIYO MARU carcass.
Mhm.
The middle, or the next column, is Parky, which is the Parker's Cove monster. And then the last column is the Kaikoura New Zealand carcass, which was the other one. So what he's done in this chart here is compared the body measurements. And the interesting thing is, if you go to, you look at the neck length and the neck vertebrae diameter. So what we're going to do, we're going to take the neck length of the ZUIYO MARU carcass and the neck length of the Parker's Cove monster and divide the neck vertebrae diameter into those measurements. And what that's going to do is give us the theoretical amount of neck vertebrae that both the ZUIYO MARU carcass and the Parker's Cove carcass had.
Got
You
it.
follow me?
Mm-hmm.
All right. So I've already done this. The neck length of the ZUIYO MARU carcass was 1.5 meters. Then the neck vertebrae diameter was 200 millimeters, which would come out to 0.2 meters.
Mm-hmm.
So I divided that into that, and the figure I came out with was 7.5. So what this seems to indicate is that based on the measurements that Yano did on the ship, the ZUIYO MARU carcass would appear to have had 7 or 8 cervical vertebrae, right?
Mm.
Somewhere in that number. Leaning toward 8, I would say, since it's 7.5. That's 7.5. So let's just say, to round it off, to 8 vertebrae, 8 neck vertebrae. So that's 8 neck vertebrae in the ZUIYO MARU carcass, theoretically, as opposed to 13 vertebrae in a plesiosaur. Okay, now doing the same thing with the Parker's Cove monster, the neck length on the Parker's Cove monster was 1.37 meters. The neck vertebrae diameter was approximately 180 millimeters. So doing the same division of the neck vertebrae diameter into the neck length of the Parker's Cove monster comes up to 7.6.
Hmm.
So this is almost the same measurement. So it's probably had 8 vertebrae in its neck too. And since it was a basking shark, you got to say that that wasn't really a neck per se. That was, you know, it looked like a neck, but it wasn't really a neck in a fish, you know. But the point I'm trying to get here is that it would appear that the neck of the Parker's Cove monster, which was definitely a basking shark, was very similar to the neck of the ZUIYO MARU carcass. You follow me?
Yeah.
And that it was less vertebrae than the shortest neck plesiosaur that we know of.
A lot less.
But we're talking about plesiosaurs that were at least 66 million years ago. You know, so what?
Yeah,
you know,
that brings-
if we're talking about its descendant, could that have changed in 66 million years? It's possible.
And, you know, that kind of brings the question as to how the length of a plesiosaur's neck affects the way its flippers are built for being aerodynamic under the water. I imagine that the length of the neck would make that vary.
There's, yeah, you've got all kinds of biomechanical questions to look at here. You know, basically, post post neck, you look at the bodies of plesiosaurs, and they're pretty much world standard issue. You know, the bodies all look the same basically. Where you get the change is in the neck and the head. So, you know, I don't know. What you're looking at with the ZUIYO MARU is you've got a neck like a big-headed plesiosaur, but with a small head on it like a small-headed plesiosaur. So could something like that exist? Theoretically, yes, but, you know, the more we get away from, the more speculative we get, the more we get into special pleading.
Yeah.
Which the skeptics are going to say, oh, you're special pleading. Well, I mean, is it special pleading or is it speculative evolution, you know?
I think that
when they make evolutionary predictions, are they special pleading as well? I don't know.
Well, they do it when it suits them, but I
well, yeah, it's, you know, it's
but in this case, it suits us, and that's the issue.
Yeah.
So well, we know it's speculative pleading because we have to imagine evolution did it. We don't have the fossil evidence for that yet.
Yeah. Well, now, so basically, we've shown that what we're looking at here, based on fossil plesiosaurs, the neck doesn't add up to it being a plesiosaur.
Yeah.
Compared with the fossils. But now, there's some other interesting things to look at, too. The amount of neck vertebrae really does match up with turtles.
Really? What kind of turtles specifically? Just like any type or any specific species?
Well, basically sea turtles and the leatherback, which is interesting. So if you wanted to make the argument that we're dealing with turtle-like plesiosaur or a plesiosaur-like turtle, you might be in better shape, you know?
Are there similarities between basking sharks or just sharks in general and in turtles in that regard?
Well, yeah. I mean, you look at a lot of these basking shark carcasses that have washed up have initially been thought to be some kind of giant turtle, and you can look at the testimony of the ZUIYO MARU crew where they said that they thought it was a giant turtle. So.
Wow, that is so interesting. Huh.
Well, yeah, hang on a second. I'm bringing up some images of the turtles here. I just got to find it. So we're not sunk yet, but we're having to build up some kind of a hypothetical reptile that's a piece of this and a piece of that, you know? So we are vulnerable on that count. Okie doke. Let me see here. On the bottom is the model of the ZUIYO MARU carcass with the measurements corrected. And on the top is the skeleton of a leatherback turtle. You can see the vertebrae there.
Yeah, and you know, it instantly strikes me as more similar than a plesiosaur, or at least an existing that we know of.
Yeah. And it doesn't have the high neural spines either. Now,
right.
This is a sea turtle neck isolated. This other image I just sent. And
it has that bend to it, yeah.
I believe there's 7 or 8 vertebrae there. I believe 7. The bottom illustration shows the vertebral count.
And
well, guys,
Scott,
I hate to pull the plug, but we've run out of time.
Okay.
So we're going to pick this up on part 4, which will be the final part, thank God. And,
well, it's been fascinating.
Yeah, so, you know, we're getting there, but it's a slow slog, you know?
I wouldn't worry about that too much. It's fascinating, and they've got so many ideas, future